we don't have another 2 or 3 years to spin our wheels. Like, things are just moving and accelerating so quickly. I think silence at this point is like, silence is complicity.
Lucy Hargreaves is one of Canada's leading voices on innovation policy and productivity. She's the co-founder and CEO of Build Canada, a non-profit that promotes the vision, ideas, and stories of leaders that believe Canada's best is yet to come. She joined us during Toronto Tech Week, almost 1 year after she was announced on stage at last year's conference as the CEO of Build Canada. Next episodes include a founder who's raised $25 million to build better business banking and a medtech leader with a near $2 billion exit. Stay tuned. Lucy, we're so excited to have you with us. We're really looking forward to learning more and diving into Build Canada. But first, I'm just so curious. You moved to Canada when you were 8. You spent so much time in your 20s living abroad all around the world. Why'd you keep coming back to Canada?
That's a great question to start with. I mean, I love Canada. There's, a reason my family came here when I was 8, which was to pursue more opportunity. We were living in the UK at the time, and my father is an academic, and there weren't a lot of opportunities for academics in the 1980s in the UK. A lot of things were changing with the government that was in power then. And so we moved to Canada because of opportunity. And we moved into this like incredibly warm, welcoming country. I remember like our next door neighbors taught us, like they went out of their way to teach us what it meant to be Canadian. We had our first Victoria Day with them where they showed us, these are the fireworks that we use to celebrate. And, we made bannock together and had our first Canada Day with them. And we were just really warmly embraced and welcomed, and I just love this country, and so I've been drawn to it over the years, and I keep coming back. I think it is a big part of what makes entrepreneurs want to stay here, and I hear this time and time again with the entrepreneurs that I speak with, is not only the culture, but it is that sense of opportunity and sense that there's something really unique happening in this country that really brings us all together. And I think they see, the opportunity to be part of building something really great. Canada is not a country that has been built and is complete. We are a work in progress. We're a project. And for any innovator or entrepreneur who sees that, I think they get excited about that because they are builders and they want to build big things. And at a very meta level, they want to be part of Project Canada, and they really thrive off that.
I love it. What do you think needs to change to enable more people to feel like they can stay?
A lot of things. So I will say, because I get criticism sometimes when I go kind of too down the negative track. It's not typically Canadian to be too pessimistic, and I am an eternal optimist, and so I like to keep that top of mind and really look at like the really positive good things. But we've made it, like, quite frankly and honestly, we've made it really difficult for entrepreneurs, and not only entrepreneurs from a founder's perspective, but young people who are working in startups and that innovation economy. We've made it really hard for them. And so there are a number of things that range from like fairly easy fixes to more complex fixes that I think would really help send the right signals to encourage them. The top kind of 3 or 4 things that I always talk about in terms of growing our productivity and encouraging entrepreneurs is number 1, tax reform. I know it's kind of a boring topic for people, but when you really start talking to entrepreneurs, you realize that our capital gains tax structure in Canada is just woefully uncompetitive with what is on offer for entrepreneurs and innovators and investors in the United States with the QSBS program. So we need to change that. That is it's a fairly simple fix, and I think would send a really strong signal to innovators and entrepreneurs. that we want to retain them here and we want to reward them for taking extremely bold risks that quite frankly don't always pay off, right? If you're starting a startup, you don't know if it's going to work. You hope it's going to work and you're going to have some sort of exit and financial benefit from that. But as you both know, not every startup story ends that way. And so these people are taking enormous risk, and we need to use our capital gains tax structure to reward that risk and encourage them. We also know that U.S. investors and Canadian investors are requiring in their term sheets Canadian founders to relocate to the U.S. so that those investors can benefit from the capital gains structure. And that's one thing that I would really love to see the government take action on. So tax structure, corporate tax structure is also wrapped in there, but I think the capital gains piece is bigger. Number two, I think we need to do a lot more to open up our markets in this country. We have a number of highly protected sectors ranging from telecommunications to financial services. Even we can go so far, if we're being a bit spicy, to talk about the dairy industry. But those protected sectors, like when you protect a sector and you don't have open competitive markets, it destroys innovation. It makes it really difficult for new innovative incumbents to start new companies in those sectors and to offer better services to customers. And it keeps prices high for consumers. So it's also a no-brainer. It's a little bit more challenging than the tax piece to unravel, but we should address that. And then the third thing that I would say is really reducing kind of the process and complexity that we've created around a whole bunch of regulatory red tape and regulatory burden. Everything from the paperwork you have to do to start a business to tax credits that you might want to avail yourself of as you're starting to, the bigger stuff like permitting times and approval times for larger projects. And so across the board, we have an extremely complicated regulatory structure, both at the provincial and federal level. And that's that doesn't exist everywhere. And it is a deterrent for people who are thinking about starting and scaling a business.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to dive deeper into that second piece, which I think is funding and backing kind of specific industries and kind of lacking the competition to allow them to be more open. There's been a lot of talk recently around kind of the government picking champions in specific markets. Yeah. How would you kind of weigh the pros of that versus how maybe would you hedge against it, and what policies would you like to see to enable more competitive and innovative strategies in the economy?
Yeah, I mean, generally picking winners hasn't worked well for our governments in this country over the last number of years. I mean, if you look at electric vehicle sector, battery manufacturing plants, like we've spent tens of billions of dollars in many of these companies, and it just hasn't worked. And so there's not a great track record of the government successfully picking winners. There's something that, free markets are great at, and that is letting the market decide. Having said that, I have had a lot of interesting conversations recently about this in a couple of different industries that are kind of, more strategic for Canada, like defense or space. And there's this concept that I've heard from a few people where they're saying, we shouldn't subsidize or protect because that is probably not the right way to go if our objective is to build strong, excellent, globally competitive companies. We don't want to kind of create them in this bubble and then realize, oh, wait, when they go and try and compete in a global market, they can't be successful because they've been overly protected in Canada. But I have heard this concept of privileging. And so there is, potentially some way that we could, privilege some Canadian companies in certain sectors to give them like a leg up, rather than, overly subsidizing or trying to pick winners. I don't know exactly like what that right balance is, but I think there's something to it because we also want, we want great companies in Canada, and so we need to figure out how to support them in the right way. Yeah, so our mission at Build Canada is to make Canada the most prosperous country in the world. I believe that we absolutely can get there. We have all of the ingredients. We've got the talent. We've got an ambitious population. We've got all of these amazing resources, and so we can do it. We have spent, the last 18 months since we founded the organization we've done a lot of different things, but one of the things is really sharing bold policy ideas at the federal level to make the action we need to take more real for people. So we've shared over 50 policy memos to date, everything ranging from bringing back a points-based system for immigration to make sure that the people we are bringing into this country are the talent that we need to help grow our economy, to, we published a memo a couple weeks ago on an AI dividend, which would help offset the costs of individuals and businesses for their AI subscriptions to help with adoption of AI across the economy. We've talked about government efficiency, reducing government spending. So we've put all these policy ideas out there, and the common thread with them is, number one, they, if implemented, they would meaningfully increase the GDP of the country and increase productivity. And number two, they're very actionable. So unlike kind of a 50 or 60 page white paper that a more traditional think tank might put out, these are very digestible, 3 or 4 pages, along with very specific policy changes or regulatory changes that would need to be made internally by the government in order to take action. So we're really trying to not only share the idea, but also share some ideas of how these could be implemented.
I love that. And I think one of the really interesting things that you've done on that data transparency piece and government efficiency piece over the last year and a half is Canada Spends. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what the idea behind it was and the vision for it?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I founded Canada Spends before Build Canada existed. So it was something that I started kind of late 2024. And the original idea behind it, and the reason I started it, was because I had spent 5 years in politics, and so including a number of years as a political advisor within the Department of Finance, and so I had seen up close the budget making process and understood the reports that were generated and what was publicly available to people. And in my conversations with people who had never had the opportunity to have roles like that, your average Canadian, they just really don't understand how governments spend money, where it goes, which programs or departments are spending more or less. And so Canada Spends really came from this idea that, wouldn't it be amazing if we could just share information on how governments are spending money in a more transparent and accessible way? And just to give people the facts. We don't editorialize on Canada Spends, but we just want to share the facts so that people can make up their own minds about what priorities they would want their tax dollars to go towards. I mean, talent seeks talent and ambition seeks ambition, which is, I think, why you see people congregating in larger hubs. If you're in Canada, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary, the big cities sort of attract talent and ambitious entrepreneurs. And there's a collection of all of the other things that you need to grow a successful business in those places. You have capital, you have the ability to attract high quality employees for your company. So, typically you see that happening. It's hard to give advice, though. It is interesting because, you can basically start a business from anywhere these days, right? So even if you are in Iqaluit and you are a motivated, high agency entrepreneur, you don't have to, you really don't have to move to Toronto to make that business successful. You could completely start it and grow it from your living room in Iqaluit. There's absolutely nothing preventing you from doing that. So it's hard to give advice. I think people really just need to figure out their own path and what works well, and know that if you are starting a business in a more remote area, like at some point in time, you're going to have to connect with larger centers for, financing and capital and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's an incredible time that we live in, really. Like, the opportunity is there for everyone. And really the only thing preventing people from taking it is themselves. And it's really an agency thing at this point.
I mean, let's talk a little bit more about that opportunity that exists in Canada. I think AI has become this really controversial and divisive topic that exists in society. We've seen students booing at graduation when speakers are mentioning it and discussing the role that it plays. What role can Canada play in the future of the AI ecosystem internationally?
Yeah, it has become a really divisive topic, and it's actually pretty concerning because you like, if you study history, you see this over time in different time periods when new technologies have come about that are disruptive and will meaningfully change how society operates. And what really I find disturbing and challenging when I see rhetoric around AI safety and this perception that AI is going to be more of a bad thing than a good thing for society. I think what we're missing, I think people have that perception because in Canada, it might be different in other countries, but in Canada, certainly the mainstream media in Canada has, like, it seems almost like gone out of their way to further perpetuate this narrative. In our country, you're not seeing a lot of balance in perspectives. You're seeing mostly anti-AI perspectives. I would love to see more sort of pro-AI or supportive perspectives to get a bit more of a balance there. So that's one thing. And so I think, when we hear protests or boos at graduation ceremonies, I think it's kind of a natural consequence of people existing in an environment where they have been surrounded by a particular narrative. So we need to change that narrative. Canada, like, if you think about Canada's opportunity in the AI space, I mean, we, like, most of the people who developed AI are Canadian. Like, a lot of it was, the technology was basically developed here, right? And it's been commercialized primarily elsewhere, especially in the US. But we do have, like, some incredible AI companies operating in Canada, ranging from, Cohere, which is developing their own LLM, to companies that are, AI first. We have Blue Jay Legal, which is, an AI first tax software. I mean, I could go on and name all of them, but, there are incredible opportunities. There are incredible businesses being built here that are AI native. And I think Canada has an incredible opportunity to lean in. But I think that will only really happen in a big way if we can shift that overall, like, broader public narrative and get more public buy-in for really taking advantage of that opportunity. At the end of the day, like, we're in a global market and it's a global competition. And so if Canada doesn't get with the program, we're going to look up in 10 years and think, how did we get so far behind all of these other countries that have really leaned in on this opportunity? It's like it's like if you think back to 1998, when people were, leaning into the internet and getting email addresses, and, you look at who were the winners, it's people who leaned into that. Like, yes, it was a choppy market and it went up and down and not everything went super smoothly, but, overall it's the direction of history. And I think, we're on an arc now that this is the direction of history, and we need to figure out, not how to protect ourselves from it, but how to smartly take advantage of the opportunity and lean into that. It's an incredible thing for Canada. The other thing that is related to AI that not a lot of people talk about or recognize is that the limiting factor to growth and adoption of AI is actually energy. It sounds counterintuitive, but that is also an incredible opportunity for Canada because we have so much potential in our energy sector to be a supplier of, the gigawatts and terawatts that we need to really help the AI industry grow.
Absolutely. And I think I want to jump back to that point that you mentioned around young people and the kind of divisiveness of AI. Taylor and I have had a lot of conversations recently with leaders who haven't felt aware, and they've believed young people should be excited about this opportunity. They should be jumping at the bit to take advantage of it, kind of similar to how you mentioned around 1998 and everyone setting up email for the first time, and it kind of changes the way that the world operates. What would you say to someone who's skeptical about AI and kind of doesn't believe in its impact? What do you think they need to hear?
There's two things that come to mind. One is they need to hear from leaders, and I'm not just talking about political leaders. I'm talking about like corporate leaders, like leaders just people who hold leadership positions in society. That those people are leaning in and excited about it and trying to do different things with the AI tools that are available. There's this great clip of this minister in Singapore who is the minister responsible for, I'm going to not get his title correct, but it's a minister who essentially is responsible for innovation. And he went on stage in Singapore a few weeks ago and basically told everyone that he has built his own AI bot using Claude. And he kind of went through it and like talked about how difficult it was and how challenging it was, and all the cool things that this bot is doing for him. It's essentially kind of like an executive assistant that he built. And I've built the same thing. It's great, but he then went on to tell the audience, like, how could I, as a minister responsible for regulating this space, how could I possibly do that with a technology I don't understand and have never really used? And so I think individuals need to hear that tone from the top, and leaders who are excited about the opportunity and are building confidence in that way. And then I think the second thing for those young people is they also need to just start experimenting and trying. It's not until you really kind of sit down at a computer yourself and have that agency to just go and play around and go beyond just your freemium version of ChatGPT, but like actually try and take these tools through their paces and build something that's useful for you in your own life. And like what might be useful in my life might be different for you in your life, but so everyone's going to have their kind of different answers to like what would be useful. But I guarantee you everyone is going to have some use case that is going to be meaningfully useful for them personally. And I would just encourage people to just start trying. And I think as people get more familiar with the possibilities and the opportunities, they'll become more open and receptive and understand just like how transformative and how big of an opportunity this is for them and for our country and for the businesses here. So yes, I do believe it should be taught in schools. Currently, what is happening in the school system in general, maybe there are some exceptions, is that kids are being told that AI is bad and they shouldn't use it. And I think that is not the right approach. My kids are a bit older, like they're 11. I have two 11-year-olds and a 13-year-old. So they're in grade 6 and 8. And by that age, like I don't know that it's necessarily great for a kindergartner or grade 2 or 3 student. Like they already have a lot of screen time, and so you don't want to layer that on. But at a certain age, kids are already using computers in the classroom. They're already using kind of like math tutoring programs, and I think they should be in an age-appropriate way, taught how to use AI, not just responsibly, but taught about how it can help them in the right way, so that they are using it as an accelerant and using it as an enhancement to the learning that they're doing in other ways in the classroom. So there's a ton of opportunity there. I mean, there's, some school like Alpha School in the U.S., which I understand that, I think they're trying to, bring that to Canada in some way. They've kind of gone like all in one direction on this. So it's like totally an AI for a school, and there's no, teachers per se, but they have guides. And so that's like one approach, but I think within our public education system, there's a ton of opportunity to do way more than we're doing now. But again, I think teachers and teacher unions and even maybe the administrators of schools are just like they don't use AI. They're just very unsure of how to implement this in the classroom. But I think it's a huge disservice to our young people. Like if we're creating this whole cohort of young people, fast forward in 6 years and my kids are graduating high school and they've only ever really been taught that AI is bad and they shouldn't use it. I mean, I certainly have different conversations with them at home, so maybe my kids are the exception. But, in general, across our population, if that's kind of the cohort that we're graduating in 5 or 6 years from high school, that's not great for, the talent in this country and for those people to be able to participate fully in the opportunity that presents itself now. And it's also not great for entrepreneurs and founders who are growing businesses and they're looking for AI native talent. Like they're just not going to be able to find it here if we don't start early enough in our school system.
Absolutely. And I think I want to link that piece that you mentioned around schools and kids being kind of taught that AI is bad. And I think that kind of comes back to what you were mentioning around mainstream media and the narrative that exists in the world that AI isn't, I think there's some people who think that AI isn't adding meaningful benefit to society. Curious, with the work that you do with Build Canada, how do you see the greatest opportunity for AI to add meaningful benefit?
I mean, there's so many ways. Like think about how Canadians interact with government services on a daily basis or a weekly basis or even an annual basis. Think about everything from tax processing to getting a passport renewed or, the way that our healthcare system, figures out which family doctors might be available in your neighborhood. Like there are just so many opportunities to leverage AI to improve processes and improve efficiency within government. Look, we could sit here probably for an hour talking about all of the examples of, where that might be possible and how it might play out. But the reality is many government operations, like at all levels of government, are just so woefully outdated. And the result of that is that Canadians pay more than they should for the services they're getting. And it's just inefficient from a tax perspective. Like we pay some of the highest income tax in the world in Canada, and yet we're not getting those world-class services. And so if I was a government official, I'd be looking at this as an incredible opportunity to improve productivity and efficiency and value for money, quite frankly, within government. And that's true not only at the federal level, but it's true provincially, it's true in any municipality across the country. There's just a huge opportunity for disruption that will result in better services for Canadians. Yeah, it's a great question. It's a hard one to answer. So what I will say is on the provincial side of things, the one province I have been really impressed with is Alberta. Actually, from the kind of deputy minister level, ADM level up, have really leaned into the opportunity. So they've really leaned in on it. So I think that's within Canada, one of the better examples of a minister and government leaning in. I think at the federal level, what we have heard is a lot of, really positive words about AI. It's taken them a really long time to develop this AI strategy, which, apparently is coming out next week, not to date your podcast, but it's coming out next week. But it has taken months. They had consultations back in October, November. They convened some of the brightest minds in Canada on AI, and I know they got a lot of great advice across the board. So it'll be interesting to see, how that shakes out and what it looks like. But I think what would have been great, and maybe we'll see this in the future. Like, I would love to see Evan Solomon do the same thing that Singaporean minister did. Why not? If I'm not a technical person, and if I can create, all of these tools internally for Build Canada and, create essentially like a GR assistant with over 20 skills programmed to do everything from memo writing to, sentiment tracking for lobbying over time that like goes into my Slack every morning that I can read. And, it helps us with our media strategy, our timing on memos and our content. Like, if I can do that myself, then there's absolutely nothing stopping somebody like Evan Solomon doing that as well. Barring time, it does take time. Cabinet ministers are busy, but I think the example in Singapore shows that where there's a will, there's a way, and I would love to see anyone responsible for regulating this space really lean into it, because I think it will give them enhanced understanding, but also more credibility to like have a viewpoint and have a perspective on these things. Maybe. I mean, you have to ask yourself in that Vancouver situation, why was there a backlash? Well, in my opinion, it's because the public has been primed for the last 2 or 3 years to have that opinion. And the media knows that they will get a lot of engagement from articles that they publish with that as the headline. It's very spicy, and people love to hate on AI because they've been primed to, right? So that's why I think he got that criticism. Now, look, if you're a cabinet minister weighing the pros and cons, of course, like you probably are thinking about that. But what I would expect any elected official in this country to really be thinking about is, from a more courageous standpoint, what is the right thing to do for the country so that we set our country up to have growth and productivity and be able to compete globally and create a world-class economy. Not, am I going to get a negative headline in this outlet or that outlet? I mean, it's easy to play the political game that way, but it's cowardly, and it is, very short-term. It's a very short-term mentality, and I would love to see more kind of boldness and courage of conviction to say, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it.
I think you're right, and I think we need more of our leaders to kind of lead by example. Absolutely, like the Singaporean minister responsible for innovation. And I wanna come back to some of the positive words that you said are kind of heard consistently around Ottawa about AI. Sovereign AI, I think, is something that everyone throws around a lot, and maybe some people who are skeptical or don't like the idea of AI don't quite understand that it plays a large role in kind of the decisions that the government's making around AI. How would you approach thinking about that? What is sovereign AI, and why does it matter?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people have different perspectives on what sovereign AI is. You'll hear everything from sovereign AI means that everything should be built in Canada, and we should only use Canadian-made solutions. To people who say like, well, there's really like no such thing as sovereign AI, and then there's a bunch of perspectives in the middle. I've had a lot of conversations about this topic in the last number of weeks, and I think fundamentally what we need to keep our eye on is we want sovereign AI to be available to us in Canada in strategic sensitive industries. So, like, yeah, does it, should CSIS, as an example, run off a sovereign AI platform that we control in Canada that nobody can shut off? Probably yes. I think we would all kind of agree that should be the case. But, is it realistic to think that, government of Canada employees across the board are going to delete Microsoft from their systems and stop using Copilot tomorrow? Probably no. And so I think it is important to think about that when you're thinking about sovereign tech and sovereign AI specifically. Is like where do we really, like, in what industries or specific sectors or specific use cases is it very, like, existentially important for us as a country to have the ability to control this ourselves, versus recognizing that Canada doesn't exist in a vacuum, and recognizing that there might be other really great models out there that are commercially available and represent, like, the latest and greatest thinking and models that are available. And so, like, why would we not want to avail ourselves of those as well? And so I think, like, that's probably more of the right way to think about it, rather than like a binary, like we should have sovereign AI, like we're either sovereign or we're not sovereign, or we have sovereign AI or we don't have sovereign AI. I think, like, where we end up is going to be a bit of a mix of many of those different solutions.
And I think to your point earlier around that narrative and that messaging in kind of mainstream media of being against AI or not being fully aware of the role that it plays in national security, or like how important the concept of having something that is competitive internationally and that Canada can control, I don't think that that's something that's being messaged well in Canada. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have such a mixed narrative publicly, where so many people are anti-AI. And, like, how do you think we could message this issue better? How do you think we could improve that?
I think we need more champions. I don't know that we're going to change mainstream media narrative overnight, but I think we need everybody who believes in the kinds of things that we've been talking about to find whatever platform they can find and talk about that. And that can be writing op-eds, it can be running, like, media campaigns, it can be talking to your neighbors and your friends. But I think we need to do all of those things to shift the narrative. But it's got to be full court press, because at this point we don't actually, like, things are just moving and accelerating so quickly. We don't have another 2 or 3 years to spin our wheels in Canada. And so, yeah, we've got to kind of be all hands on deck with this. And I would love to see corporate Canada actually step up a lot more than they have. It's easier for, I think, tech founders of sort of like smaller private businesses to step up and say things publicly. I don't see a lot really being said from, any of our bank CEOs or any of our large, our large corporate CEOs that are not in the tech space. And I would love to see them actually step up and support this more, because when you think about their companies, they have a lot to gain from an AI first economy and talented workers and employees who are bringing the latest and greatest of their, with them and their digital toolkit. And I think silence at this point is, like, silence is complicity at this point, and I would love to see corporate Canada step up more. So I'll maybe like talk worst case scenario first, and then we'll end on optimism. Like worst case scenario is that we, further perpetuate an economy that is stuck in the 1880s, and that we have an outdated view of Canada's economy, which is heavily resource based, old industries that have been around forever, and it's just not innovative. It's slow moving. And look, there's globally there's a place for that. I don't think Canada would fail as a nation if that's the path that we went down, but we would forever be supplying other people's supply chains, and other countries would benefit from the increased economic productivity of an innovation economy, and we would kind of be stuck in a different situation. And so Canada can choose to do that, and we would still be a country, and I think we would be fine, but we would not be fulfilling our full potential. And we could choose a different path, and that different path is making it easy for entrepreneurs, creating the environment where we're encouraging AI, and really going all in on this idea that we can be an AI native country with an AI native economy. And that scenario is incredible. It means that we don't have continued brain drain of our brightest young people to the United States. We keep them here. We are growing and scaling and exiting significant companies that is creating wealth not only for individuals themselves, but wealth that can be redistributed into the economy in the form of taxes, but also redistributed into the innovation ecosystem in the form of angel checks and venture capital funding to continue to grow and scale our innovation economy. And so and it's not only I think it is important to also call out that we're not just talking about the tech sector here or the innovation economy. We're actually talking about benefits across the board. So if we really lean into this opportunity and we have the talent and we implement that throughout our economy, we're going to find that our critical mineral mining companies are going to be world-class and amazing because they are so much more efficient and productive. We're going to find that our, forestry companies and agriculture companies are world-class and amazing and incredibly productive because they have embraced and been encouraged to embrace and have the talent to embrace, AI first processes and systems. And so I think it's we have a lot of these conversations within the tech sector and within the innovation economy, but that economy is really across all sectors, and there's a huge opportunity to make our economy and our businesses much more efficient and productive across all sectors. And Canada can lead the way on that. There's really no reason we can't. It's just a choice.
And there was a stat that Build Canada shared last week or earlier this month, I believe, which was that Canada's falling behind. Canada's businesses are at 12% adoption of AI.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And what do you think needs to change to get Canada to this AI native economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tone from the top and leadership and public sentiment. We don't celebrate it and talk about it. And so businesses are, they're scared. They're not hearing that they should do this. There's no pressure for them to do this. And also they don't have the talent to, internally within their teams to be able to do this. And so you combine all of those things together, and it's no wonder that we are, 12%. I think we were, 15 or 16 on that list. Denmark was 42%. That's incredible. Good for Denmark. We should be doing that. So I think all of those, it's not one reason why we're not, why we're not number one, but it's this kind of convergence and combination of reasons that I think compound together to result in this overall kind of vibe and sentiment that makes it really difficult for businesses to do anything, because if they do, they're looking around at their peers, they're not seeing any of their peers doing it. And so why would they? They're competing in a small pond, and they're only really going to start hustling on this if they start to see others in the same ecosystem start to hustle. And I think leadership does have a lot a big role to play in like encouraging that and moving it forward.
And is it just leadership? Like, what do you say to an employee at one of these big firms who's in the middle of the hierarchy and they want to be able to have access to these tools to be competitive, both within the country to be able to job hop if they want to, or internationally? These are skills that employees are now seeking out. They want to work at firms that allow them to use these tools. What do you say to an employee who's stuck in the middle where management hasn't made the decision to allow people to use AI, but they're stuck because they would like to?
I mean, that's a tough spot to be in. I don't know what I would do. I mean, I think like, look, I would probably encourage those people to like build something to demonstrate the value. Like sometimes people just need to be shown, right? And so what is the anxiety of middle management in that scenario? Maybe it's that they don't believe that a tool could be helpful. So maybe you need to build something to show them that it could be helpful. But ultimately, like I think businesses like that are going to lose out because I think young people, for the most part, are very bright and smart and have options. And so if the employee that we're talking about in this scenario is banging their head against a brick wall because they're in a business that is just not supportive, look, they're going to try a bunch of things to try and make it work there, but ultimately they're going to vote with their feet and they're going to go to a business that is supportive. And so really, I think, as that plays out, if you have that same scenario play out many, many times across businesses in the economy, those businesses are ultimately going to be at a serious disadvantage. But really, like building something and demonstrating and testing is a great way to bring people. Right.
What is a workflow? So much
Totally.
value in someone.
Yeah, you need to see it to believe it. Yeah.
And I think to your point as well, this is how we shift the messaging. This is how we bring the messaging back to in more AI native companies instead of having to lay people off and trying to make up those gain or those losses with AI. You can use AI and turn the output of a 30-person company into a 100 or a 300-person company. And that's where Canada can lead. That's where we have that opportunity to drive forward. And I think that's the messaging of, instead of people being laid off, it's companies where employees now have the opportunity to do less admin work, less monotony.
Right.
They were focused on the high value work.
You can be more ambitious as a company. Like you don't necessarily have to lay people off. You can just think, oh my God, we, are a 50-person company and we used to do this. And now we can be a 50-person company and our ambition can be here. And like, isn't that incredible? And I think there's no limit really to, the scale and the scope of what companies can do. I think it's really there for the taking for founders who are ambitious and have that vision and want to lean in. We're not dividing up a set pie. I think what we are doing is growing the pie for everyone. And really, we're in a period where people are taking slices of the pie, right? And they're deciding, what they want to lean in on and where they can grow. But the only limiting factor really is ambition at this point.
And that's the message. I mean, we need to, as a country, increase our ambition. We need to be ambitious to be that best country, most prosperous country in the world. We need to, in our companies, be more ambitious to be more successful, set higher goals. That's the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be more prosperous and there's going to be more work and different work to do. I mean, if you're like, look, if you had spent the last 2 years of your life doing an MBA and you were graduating this year, it's a pretty bad market to be in for a certain skill set that you've trained for that used to be highly valued and valuable, and now you're entering into a market that just has changed and it is not valuable. So a lot of those people are going to have to pivot, and it's going to be hard for them. So not trying to minimize that. But, my son's going into grade 9 in September, and so we're starting to have, some conversations about, what he might want to lean in on or do, and he's really just not sure. And all I really tell him, like we talk a lot about the opportunities, but I also say to him, like, look, there's going to be so much that changes in the next 4 years. The most important thing is to, like, work hard, put in your best effort, work on stuff that you really enjoy, figure out what you're passionate about in life and where you want to spend your time and energy. And like, this is a decision you can make kind of 3 or 4 years down the road. But I think, like, bigger picture, setting my own kids aside, I actually do think a lot about how our academic institutions and our educational pathways that we have become so used to in Canada are going to change. And I'm not really convinced that there will be as much demand for post-secondary education in the same way that, like, we might be familiar with, like when I was in high school, like the message was like, you go to high school, then you go to university, or maybe like a college if you're interested in a skilled trade, and then you maybe do a master's degree, and then you get a job. And that was the path, and most people did that. And now I think for a lot of young people who might previously have been thinking about going down the MBA consulting track, I think they're looking at that now and thinking like, well, maybe I don't even need to go to university, or maybe I need to go to university for 1 or 2 years just to connect with some people and figure out what I want to do, maybe get some basic skills. But, there's so much learning that can be done independently that's now accessible to us through some of these AI tools, that if you are a high agency person, there's a lot that you can teach yourself. And I think there will be, a lot of people looking at kind of the more traditional undergraduate degree and really questioning why they would spend $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 a year to go pursue that when there are other pathways and other options available to them.
I agree. And I think that future is a tricky one to think about, because when we look at the future of post-secondary education and we think about kind of the role that's played in our society for decades, really, I wonder like how that shifts and how that changes as it, like, do you think that takes 10 years to become like a normal expectation, where instead of for years and years everyone went to high school, graduated, everyone went to undergrad, graduated, immediately got a job? That's obviously not the case anymore. And we've started to hear the messaging on that when you go to university, you might not be able to expect to get a job right away. What do you think that transition from where we're at today to where we're at in this future, where education is something that is perceived and viewed very differently, looks like?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a great question, but already I saw a stat the other week around tuition for business schools for people getting their MBAs. This was a US stat, not Canadian, but I'm sure it applies here as well, that like some business schools were cutting their tuition by 50% because they had just seen only in the last year like this precipitous decline of students wanting to go get an MBA. And so I think like you might see, like it might happen on a very quick timescale where academic institutions do operate in a market. And if the demand is no longer there for certain degrees, I think you're going to see academic institutions responding very rapidly to that. And it'll be interesting to see what other things pop up. Like maybe there will be other, kind of like training or learning programs that are run outside of traditional academic institutions that are maybe shorter in time horizon. Maybe it's like a 1 or 2 year program that teaches a certain set of skills that are maybe more relevant in society. And so I think you'll see a lot of market forces at play in the next couple of years as young people kind of figure out where they want to, what's most valuable, where do they want to spend their time and their money. And you'll probably see some new entrants pop up with other offerings. Like if you look at, from an entrepreneur perspective or innovation economy perspective, you look at, Y Combinator as an example in the US. They're not an academic institution, but it is like an incredibly competitive program to get into. They have super high standards, an incredible curriculum of sorts, although it is there is curriculum, but it's very practical as well. And there's a huge demand. It's not you don't get a degree after it, but you get all of these other things and massive signal to the market that you are an entrepreneur or a group, a team of entrepreneurs worth investing in. And so maybe we'll see more things like that where there is there's a value and a signal that is being sent by a program, but is not operating fully within the academic structure.
And I'm curious, as you look ahead to that future and thinking about kind of the role that the government could play in that transition from our society where we are today and where we have been for decades to one that's more of an AI native society. Do you think the government has a role to play in that transition?
For sure. I think government sometimes is best just not doing anything and getting out of the way. And I think it's, flawed thinking to think, and I know this is not what you were saying to me, so I'm not saying that your thinking is flawed, but I think a lot of people, including people within government, think that the answer to all problems is more government intervention. And in many cases, the best thing for government to do is to kind of back off. I think in this case, government needs to lead by example. They probably need to ensure that however they regulate AI is not overly constrictive to the sector. Of course, is safe, but is, they need to create a regulatory framework that is encouraging of innovation and supportive of innovation. And then I think there's things that they can do in their, tax system probably to incentivize the adoption of AI by individuals and by companies. But beyond that, I think they probably just need to get out of the way. I think the more they start, trying to set up super clusters or innovation hubs or overly programmed, early stage support hubs, which we've seen, you see these across the country. Typically those things don't result in growing globally competitive companies. They typically result in pouring more public subsidies into companies that quite frankly just shouldn't succeed because there's not a market for them, but they might limp along for the next 3 or 4 years because they're getting government handouts. So I definitely wouldn't want to see that happen, but I think there's a few things they should do to sort of set the playing field appropriately, and then for the most part get out of the way. Yeah, so we are a team of 5 people now. We're focused in 3 kind of main areas of work. Number 1 is our content and narrative, and this is where we spend most of our time and energy, putting out content on the bold policy ideas that we believe will help move our country forward, and also sharing more positive stories about entrepreneurs who are building and growing great businesses here in Canada. It's not covered by mainstream media. We want to talk about it more. I don't think we are the only organization that should be talking about these things, but we're going to be doing our part by sharing some of those stories. And then generally sharing a narrative across our social media channels on everything from positive vision for Canada to the practical things that can be done to move us along the way. So that's one piece. The second pillar is our digital tools. So I would include Canada Spends in that. So we're continuing to build out digital tools to help Canadians increase their understanding of government, how government operates, what are they spending money on at all different levels of government, and also increase transparency on progress. So we have an outcomes tracker at the federal level that tracks progress that the government has made on over 633 commitments, and kind of automatically updates that and shares it with Canadians in an easy to digest way. We'd love to roll that out to provincial governments and municipalities as well. And then the third thing is really our builder network. So we have this incredible network of entrepreneurs and founders who we work very closely with. They sponsor, they author memos, they sponsor memos, they put their names on the ideas. We bring them together for, everything from sort of like small events with policymakers to build bridges and increase kind of mutual understanding and break down silos, to larger events where we bring in the broader Build Canada community as well. So fireside chats on policy issues and direction of Canada. And so we'll be doing more with that builder community over the next 12 months as well. 3 years from now, actually, I don't know if Build Canada will exist. It's we're an organization that we're very mission driven. We operate like a startup, not like a think tank, and we're very disruptive and are opportunistic in what we engage in. And if in 3 years the country's going in the right direction and we don't need to be around anymore, then we'll take a serious look at that. And it's a question that I ask myself every 6 months: is do we need to exist? Why do we need to exist? What should we be focusing our time and energy on? And I think it's a healthy thing for we're a nonprofit organization. It's a healthy thing for any nonprofit organization to think about. So I don't know, in 3 years, maybe I'll come back on in 3 years and we can talk about it.
We're recording this during Toronto Tech Week, and yesterday was Tech Week Homecoming, which is basically the 1 year anniversary 11-month anniversary of you being named and announced as a Build Canada CEO. What's one thing you're most proud of over the first 11 months of leading the organization?
Yeah, honestly, our team at Build Canada is just so incredible. They are so passionate about the future of this country, and they really represent the best of the talent that I hope every Canadian business can have. They're young, they're ambitious, they are super smart, and they deeply, deeply care about Canada. And so I'm just proud every day that I get to work with those people and do this incredible work. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I focus mostly on the next kind of 6 to 12 months at any given time. I think that's a great way to look at it because it allows you to, you can kind of have an overall trajectory of things, but I think we're in such a dynamic world. You have to give yourself the flexibility to pivot and change, and really normalize that and how you're thinking about your career and your life and where you're placing yourself. So I love to do that sort of like long-term vision, but really more short-term planning. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you look back at my career over the last number of years, I've been in a lot of different spaces. I've worked in, international policy. I've worked in international development. I've spent, over a decade overseas. I've worked in politics. I helped lead a San Francisco-based tech company for 4 years on their leadership team, and we scaled that from 10 people to 80 people, raised $100 million. I've kind of done a lot of different things. Build Canada brings a lot of those different pieces together. And I'm very entrepreneurial, and I want to make a difference. So wherever Build Canada goes or whatever I do in the future, it's gonna check some or all of those boxes.
I'm glad that you mentioned kind of taking a moment and being reflective of where you're at in the world. And I think both of us have kind of done that similarly. We took companies that we were running independently and felt there was a lot of opportunity to come together and build something in the space that we're in now, helping companies implement AI. And I'm curious for you, the last 18 months with Build Canada, that moment of creating Build Canada and kind of coming together to co-found it. Why did you feel like now was the right moment, that Canada needed to step into this, that Canada needed to get on this right direction?
Yeah, I mean, you have to rewind your brain and time to where we were at mentally as a country in, December 2024, January 2025. It was a pretty dark period. I mean, there was not a lot of optimism. There was a lot of uncertainty at the political level in the country. We're about to go into a federal election campaign. And so at that time, it was a great moment for Build Canada to start as a project because nobody was talking about, positive policy ideas to grow our economy. We were one of the first organizations to start putting those ideas out there in like a practical, optimistic way. And so like that was kind of the genesis. But even, if you think about when Build Canada was started, I didn't step in as CEO until July of last year. It was a project that was volunteer driven by many different entrepreneurs and people who wanted to, spend a couple hours a day on the side of their desks contributing to this, myself included. I mean, I was kind of doing it from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. and then, like 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. every night. While also having this day job as an executive at a San Francisco-based tech company. So like it was a very busy time, and I was not the only one doing that. Everyone who was involved were just so passionate about what we were working on that, it seemed, it was just fun. Like we were working on a fun project that we all kind of felt there was a time and a place for. And the reason Build Canada continues is because, people have agreed that there still is a time and place for Build Canada to continue, which is, why we have, successfully raised some funding to be able to continue, and why we keep going. But the moment that we kind of collectively just decide we don't need to exist, then we can talk about what it should morph into or become in the future.
And I think we are in that moment as a society right now, as Canada, where we have to kind of look ahead to the future and think about what are we doing as a group of people to push the country forward. This is a moment where we need to be so focused on Canada's productivity, Canada's long-term ambitions. I know you mentioned 6 to 12 months ahead. I mean, it's a big thing for us as well, because realistically, everything in the world feels like it changes every month or two.
Every day.
Exactly.
I wake up, I'm like, oh, what's the latest model today? I don't know.
Where do you see what are you most excited for in the next 6 or 12 months with Build Canada?
I'm super excited about the influence that our communications and our content and our narrative can have. We're going to be testing. I actually just hired a filmmaker, and I'm trying to bring on a small team of filmmakers into Build Canada over the summer to test new ways of communicating the things that we want to talk about in very compelling film storytelling style. So we're going to be testing some different content ideas. So I'm really excited about that. And from a kind of nerdy policy perspective, I'm excited for the fall budget federally, because I think that's actually going to be the real test case of how much, not just traction for Build Canada. We actually don't measure the success of Build Canada in terms of have specific policies been implemented or not. We actually measure our success based on content impressions. So we have a different focus, although we think it is great when the policy ideas that we have suggested, gain traction and are read. But we believe that actually more change and more influence will happen because of a broader narrative shift and mentality shift across Canada. But I'm excited for the federal budget because I think it will be like it'll really tell us a lot about the level of seriousness with which this federal government wants to move forward on sort of supporting productivity and focusing on productivity and growing our economy. They certainly say that they want to do those things, and we've seen some signals and signs along the way. I think there's a growing impatience in Canada for like more concrete movement and progress in those areas, and I think the federal budget will be like a really, really strong signal of what direction they're taking on that.
And we were talking about the best and worst case scenario for Canada going forward. What's the best case scenario for this budget? What would it include if you see it as them taking it seriously?
Capital gains tax, like significant capital gains tax reform would be hands down number one. Significant movement on opening up our regulated markets and creating more competitive markets, and a significant focus on regulatory burden and not just red tape reduction, but ways to like really truly accelerate approvals and permitting and moving forward on those things across the economy, not just for designated major projects, but looking at like more broadly across all projects, across all industries. How can we just accelerate everything? Yeah.
I'm not.
So I think there should be maximum transparency, but I also know that the public service unions will probably uh, not want that to happen, and so I think we're probably not going to get the kind of transparency that you or I might want. But I think there should be transparency. I mean, I think actually transparency builds trust. And so if you want to bring Canadians along with you on this journey and you want to build their trust and their confidence in AI, then they should absolutely be super transparent about what they're testing, what they're learning, which departments are, like what services are they improving through different models and different tools. And they should just be out in the open with that. Do I think that will happen? I mean, I hope so, but I think it'll be difficult because it's just not really the way that most governments run. But I think people should push for that. Citizens should push for more transparency. At the end of the day, governments exist because of the tax dollars that we all pay. And so, I think people should get a little bit more outspoken and loud about how much transparency they want. And ultimately, transparency is, it's sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? So I think not only will it, I think that help people understand what government is doing, but I think also will build more trust with citizens.
I think as we talk a lot about that narrative piece of how can Canada message better on AI, and I think that's part of it. Like, how can you be more transparent about how government's using AI, how everyone is viewing AI internally? And I think those conversations that are happening is the big opportunity.
Yeah.
How do you think Build Canada's role in that transparency and data openness piece will continue to evolve as the government kind of navigates this confusing, ever-changing time?
Yeah, I mean, like we are very, like with our digital tools, we build in public, and so everything is transparent on GitHub for us. It's all open source. And I think we'll like continue to advocate for that within the government. And I think we've actually shown, and it's not just us, there are others in the space as well. We've shown that you can just build things, right? Like you can take open data that is published by the government. Like there was a fellow a couple of weeks ago who basically like rebuilt the StatsCan website with all of their tools and just made it better. And he did it using, I think it was Claude, and I'm not sure how long it took him to do it, but I've checked it out and it's really great. And it's much more user friendly than what StatsCan has.
And how many millions or billions of dollars would we spend to do that as a government?
An insane amount.
Right.
Like there would be a whole contracting process, and then there would be consultants, and like probably at the end of the day, I don't know how much it would cost, but I wouldn't even be surprised if it was $100 million. I mean, we, just look at ArriveCan as an example of, how many millions of dollars can be spent on things that just could be done for a lot cheaper. There was another person who created an inventory of historic sites, that was publicly accessible based on open data that Parks Canada made available. All of these things, like I think people are going to continue. I think, Build Canada definitely leads by example in this, but I think there are many motivated citizens across Canada who want more, like not just more transparency, but they want more user-friendly, accessible tools. And what we can build now is means that you can take the publicly available yet completely user unfriendly information that is out there, sort of published in some place on a government website, and you can take that and you can make it into something that is like easy to digest, easy to understand, useful, user friendly, and I think that actually will eventually put more pressure back on government, because I think citizens will start to demonstrate themselves that in a very short period of time, with little or no budget, other than the tokens that you've used, you can develop this. And I think it might not happen in the next 6 months, but certainly in the next 1 to 3 years, governments are going to look at this and think, oh, we should do that. And I think also citizens are going to look at that and say to governments, well, why aren't you doing that? Why are you wasting $100 million on consulting fees for this thing when you could just spend $50,000 and hire one very talented young person who could build it for you in 3 months, And so I think that kind of cycle of pressure is what we demonstrate, and then pressure is what we need to see more of.
And imagine how much better those dollars could be allocated if we had kind of more capability to spend on things that actually
let's put it in our healthcare system.
Exactly.
Our healthcare system is broken. We should
Exactly.
we should spend more there. There are I'm not an advocate for just not spending any taxpayer dollars on anything, but it's just the current allocate overall I think we do spend too much, but the current allocation is just totally off right now. And we have in Ontario broken healthcare system, broken education system, and if we were more efficient with all of these other things, you would actually find that there's more money for the things that people really do need, and for things that is a core competency of government. It is a core competency of government to fund and support a healthcare system or an education system. It is not a core competency of government to pick tech winners or build their own digital solutions in-house. There are much more efficient ways to do that.
And that's the message of the potential of AI. It's that as we make government more efficient, government has more capacity to spend money on things that actually matter.
Right.
And that things that will directly benefit the lives of Canadians. And I think that's the message that Canadians need to hear about AI, which is AI can impact our lives by creating more productive companies, creating more productive and efficient governments, and drive this ecosystem of a broader economy that will actually deliver greater benefit to them in the end than if we didn't use it in the first place to implement these tools.
Yeah, totally. I think it should be tax credits. So this AI dividend memo that we published a couple of weeks ago, is a great idea. So like there should be tax credits for businesses to be able to write off or like get reimbursed. I think that in our memo it was up to 500,000 spend on subscriptions and tokens. I think we should be incentivizing that through our tax system. I don't think subsidies is really the right way to think about it, but I think there are credits and incentives via the tax code that could go to businesses and individuals to encourage the adoption and to make that kind of a no-brainer decision, right? So if you're a small business and you're thinking, oh well, we can't really, maybe you want to do it but you can't really afford it, a tax credit is a great way to like nudge you over the line and make it a really low friction decision.
If there was one thing that you could tell the Canadian government to spend capital on with AI to make more efficient, if there was one tool that could be more efficient in Canadian government, what would that be?
It's a call center issue. So there's with CRA is the prime example, but there's also passport services. Like there are a variety of call centers that exist across government, and they can just be run by AI. I mean, major companies around the world are using AI to run their call centers. There's like great examples of this, from major airlines to other kind of consumer goods companies. If you book a car rental at many major companies in the US now, and you have to call them for an issue, you're talking to an AI agent, and it's great.
Like, and you're talking to them right away.
And you're talking to them right away. You're not on hold for 30 minutes or an hour, and they give you correct advice. There's always a human in the loop, and you can kind of escalate if you want. But like, why are we not doing that at CRA immediately? Like, the technology exists, and there was this Auditor General's report that came out late last year. I can't remember the exact timing, but it basically showed that even when people did get through to an agent at CRA, like a human agent at CRA to answer their questions, that person, a shockingly high amount of the time, and maybe you want to fact check this in your show notes, it was something like 70% of the time they were given the incorrect information and advice. And so, like, not only are you taking a long time to get through to someone, but then when they do get through to someone, they're getting the wrong information. And so, like, there's clearly something broken with that system. And it's a no-brainer that we should just fix. I think they're working on it, but, I think we also can't be too precious about these things, and we need to move faster.
Well, and if they're working on it, why don't we know that they're working on it, right? Like, could they tell us that this is something that is being improved and they're
next week.
Yeah.
Maybe next week. Maybe that's coming in the AI strategy.
Yeah. I mean, it should be. Yeah. I don't know that that's happening.
Right.
It's unclear, but it should be. Yeah.
AI is becoming continuously, increasingly divided. What do you think is one message that needs to change for someone who doesn't believe that AI will add value to Canadians?
I think it's the opportunity. I mean, I think that the message that needs to change is you need to shift from this idea that AI is scary and is coming for your job and is going to make you, worse off, to a frame that is more around, yes, AI is very disruptive, but we have had technological change over centuries, and this is the latest version of that change, and it is a massive opportunity. And so here's how you can best equip yourself to ensure that you're positioned to take advantage of that opportunity. That's kind of the overall shift. And I think it's contextualizing it for people on a historical timeline. Before we didn't have a printing press, and then we had a printing press, and we didn't have, the Industrial Revolution in Northern England that like completely changed how we make clothing, to, the steam engine, to automobiles. If you were a person who was used to driving around a horse and cart and taking passengers around town, you would have looked at the automobile as like a complete disruptive thing that is going to take your job away. But like, we moved on as a society, and we actually grew and got better. And like obviously the internet in the late 90s, early 2000s was like an incredible opportunity as well. And this is just sort of like, it's the next thing in that continuum of human progress. And that's something to celebrate and be excited about. And so I would really like, that's kind of the mentality I think we need to change. And it's like the framing of the issue that we need to change for people is not like, don't come at this from a place of fear or anxiety, but come at this knowing that, humans are an incredible species that have progressed over time in many, many different ways. And technological innovation is a core part of human history. And we're just continuing that journey. And here's how we're going to kind of work together to make the most of it and make sure that nobody gets left behind. But like, the best thing we can do is put it in that context and embrace it so that we can all benefit from it.
Absolutely. What's one prediction you would make for 2027 in Canada?
Oh, I'm not really one for predictions, but oh gosh, that's a hard one. I don't know. I mean, I think I personally think here's maybe a spicy one. I think by 2027, we will see a normalization of our relationship with the United States. I think people are going to realize that we are better off figuring out ways to win together rather than trying to isolate ourselves and overly index on other partnerships. So I think by 2027, my prediction will be that the Canadian public will have a different perspective on our relationship with the U.S.
I hope so.
Or one question we should ask the next guest, not knowing who they are.
Oh, yeah. My question would be, what motivates you to do what you do?
I like it.
Why do you do what you do?
I like it.
Yeah.
Well, curious, kind of on that theme, our last question to kind of tie things together, we talked at the very beginning about you kind of moving to Canada when you were 8, living all over the world in your 20s, continuously choosing to stay in Canada. What keeps you excited about the future of Canada going forward?
It's like endless possibility. I mean, Canada, like, look at Canada. It's an amazing country. We have all of these like incredible resources. We have what the world wants here. We have all of this talent. We have an amazing population and incredible culture. Like, why wouldn't you want to be here? It's a beautiful country. And really the sky is the limit. Like as I was saying at the beginning of the show, like, it's really just it's ours to lose at this point. And it's a choice. We can make amazing, incredible choices that will help us grow and like actualize our potential. But Canada is still a project and we're a work in progress. And, that's an incredible journey for anyone to be on. And that's what makes me excited about Canada.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much.